Today is April 1st, and that means today is the last day you can get tickets to Growth Now Summit Live. So head over to growthnowsummit.com and grab your tickets today. We still have a ton of general admission tickets left. And so make sure you come join us and put yourself in this room that is filled with incredible people. Today is the last day, and then we're shutting it down. I'm not extending it. People always message me after you close it down and say, "Hey, please, 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 can you open it back up?" And the answer is I can't, unfortunately. So go ahead and grab your tickets today, and we will see you there on April 4th. April 1st also means it's my anniversary. April 1st means I got married on this day 2 years ago. I went on my first date with my wife 6 years ago on this date, and that's why she is my guest today. Babe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, babe. Second
I,
time.
I should say second time, but first time is Lauren Schenck. So that's important.
It is the yes.
So from like an SEO standpoint, I say to everybody, you should go on every show when a podcaster invites you on because it's really good for SEO. But I feel like you had to reset your SEO once you got married.
Yeah. I keep changing the name. So I think I'll stick with this one and then the SEO is gonna just skyrocket.
Perfect. Perfect. You know, it's funny. I just want to make it clear to everybody listening. We're not doing this episode to tell you how to have a happy marriage. There are way too many influencers who get married, and within 3 months, they start telling you how to have the perfect marriage. And there's so many examples of this. I'm not going to call anybody out. Actually, it's really funny. So Ebony posted an Instagram story the other day about somebody that you and I have talked about before. And he was sharing out his
Mhm.
marriage advice, and I'm like, this dude has been he was on his second marriage when he came out 2 months later, started talking about how to have a healthy relationship. That marriage ended. They tried again and ended again. And I think there's too much of that, right? I think there's too much in this space of influencers that says, oh, hey, like I'm doing this now. Now let me make money off of it. And I just think it's
Mhm.
rather disgusting. And I think one thing I love about you is like you're a true student, right? You've been a student your whole life. You become a master of the thing that you do, and then you
Yes.
start talking about it. It's not like this one lesson at a time, and we'll get into all that stuff. But I want to talk about how, you know, when we found each other in life through Bumble, by the way, when we found each other through Bumble,
Mhm.
both you and I have already we're on this journey of failed relationships. You were married previously, all these things. But the journey was really like we had to heal ourselves. We had to fix ourselves before we found our partner to make it a healthy relationship. Like, what was that journey like for you over those, I think it was like 8 or 9 years that you were left your ex and then we started dating? Maybe that's bad math, maybe 5 years.
It was
Um,
actually 5 years. Five
okay.
years.
So what was that like
And
for
it's
you?
really
Like,
funny.
go ahead.
So it's really funny that it was 5 years because when I first got divorced, I thought that I needed to get like remarried right away. I thought I wanted to have another child. I was trying to rush through the process, and I read some piece of advice that a mother had given to a daughter saying it's going to take you 5 years. And I was like, I do not have that kind of time. Well, guess what? It took 5 years. But that process, it was a lot, as you know, from my previous experience. I had a lot of trauma, a lot of emotional abuse, and things that I didn't even realize had happened. And so I had to take a lot of time to come to a realization of that. I think that was one of the biggest things I had to come to is realize what had actually happened. And then I started to build myself back up. And I worked with a lot of my modalities that I still do today. Yoga is the foundational healing modality that I've used consistently. And I just spent a lot of time with myself and being self-aware and trying to figure out what I needed and what I wanted. Now, I fell down a lot. My dating life before I met you was pretty messy because I didn't realize until way later that I needed self-love that I never had. And so I was trying to seek love outside of myself because I felt that there was something missing and I thought that someone else was going to give that to me. But and then once I realized that I needed self-love, that's when, oh, my healing just catapulted because that's when I started really focusing on who I was and what I wanted and what I needed. And then when I met you and you were already on this growth journey, I was like, oh, this is what I'm looking for, someone who understands trauma and healing and growth and continuing that through life. So that was kind of what my journey was in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, it's funny because you talk about self love and all that stuff. And For me, it was a very similar journey, right? Like I was looking
Mhm.
for outside love to make me feel good, whether that was with a partner, whether that was with, success in the podcast and in business, and the end of the day, like those outside sources, they're kind of like a drug, right? Like you're gonna get that high at first, and then you're going to quickly
Mhm.
unravel, right? And like I would be the self sabotager, right? I'd self sabotage in my relationships and my business and all that stuff. And finally, I had that aha moment of like, oh no, wait, hold on. I have to realize that this is about me and figuring out how I can be my best self. So if I ever encounter the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, then I can actually, be present in that moment and not always worry about myself. Like for you, did you have like an aha moment? Like it took me a long time to figure that out.
I think I had a lot of aha moments. I talk about a lot of the steps that I took to overcome my divorce and trauma. And so each of those steps took an aha moment. And there was the self-love, there was the self-care, there was, the course correction, changing your mind, moving away from something, and having that aha moment of that's okay. Um, and it was all just at different points in my journey. Like the self-love moment, the aha moment was me reading a book of this woman who we both have followed and know. Um, she realized that she didn't love herself and she went on a journey and she had the aha moment of, oh my God, I love myself. And I said, oh, I want that too. And so that, started my journey of self-love. And then I don't know if it was an aha moment, but it was a moment of clarity where I was like, oh, okay, I'm here. And now I love myself. And everything shifted from that. So I don't know that there was one aha moment. It was
Whose
a
book was it?
series of them. Liz D'Alto's.
Oh my gosh, Cutco days. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't even the best
Eliz
part is
Elizabeth D'Alto.
yeah, Elizabeth D'Alto.
Yeah,
Now,
it is.
that's
Yeah.
so
So it
funny
was her
because
book.
this feels like our regular marriage talking over each other and except this one's recorded. But here's the thing, like it's so funny like the Liz I don't know if Liz has ever been mentioned on this show or Elizabeth has ever been mentioned on this show. Like I didn't know her as the person that you knew her as. Like I sold Cutco knives with her.
Mhm.
Like she lived in Bucks County, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and I was in the Delaware County office, and so we would have like these regional meetups and she would be there and she would always be like the best sales rep, like number one in all the competitions and all that stuff. And so that's kind of how I knew her. And then she's obviously evolved as a human and figured a lot of stuff out and wrote the book. That's why I was like, what? Who are you talking about? Because I was thinking it was Gabby, but no, that is so
No.
funny. Um, no, but it's so true. Like I think when we reflect back and we look at like our life as we kind of travel through it, we reflect back and you can kind of pinpoint certain moments. But as you're going through it, you don't realize it. Like you don't realize like,
Right.
oh, right now is going to be the time that shifts everything. Like it takes time. And I'm finalizing my keynote for my event. And I was realizing I want to talk about how like so many people try and teach from the open wound, right? Like I talk about how like the open wound is for you to learn and the scar is to teach other people. And there's so many people who try and teach from the open wound and they're not actually healing. Like what have you done? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what have you done to begin the healing, right? Because when you find that book and you start reading it, it's still an open wound. How do you start healing it?
Well, let me go back to teaching from the wound versus, teaching from the scar. What I actually did is I started speaking from my wound, not teaching, but sharing my story of, picking myself up, being a single mom, and all these things. And just in the sharing of it, wasn't sharing any wisdom at all. I was actually more sharing how I was like falling flat on my face. But I had so many people reach out to me and say like, oh, I see you doing this so that I know that I can do it too. That happened a lot while I was in the wound stage. So we talk about not teaching from the wounds, but absolutely, I really am a big fan of sharing from the wounds because it's a vulnerability that people need to hear so that they understand that they're not alone.
Yeah.
But the things that I did to heal, like I said, I started with yoga. Yoga is more than just poses. It is an entire practice of reaching a state of non-attachment, bliss, enlightenment, and happiness. But along the way, you learn so many things about yourself and being in your body and present in the moment. And that helps you be self-aware. It helps you with self-love and all those things. Um, just focusing on my health. I'm a holistic wellness coach. And so focusing on eating the right foods, getting the right sleep, getting the right movement, drinking the water, so that my body is not in a state of, disarray, so that my brain can actually function properly and my entire nervous system can settle so that I can actually process these emotions properly. Talking to people. I did, have therapists. I had shamanic, leaders, teachers. I had Reiki practitioners. I reached out to other people to help me with this healing. And I think that's something that's very important for people to do because you're not alone. Nobody is alone, and we shouldn't be carrying all these things alone. Especially as a mom in our society, it's kind of implied that we should be doing it all and doing it by ourselves for some reason, even though historically and in ancient times we never were. But I think that's one thing that I learned, especially being a single mom. I didn't know any other single moms really for a while. And so I felt very alone. So I had to really reach out to people and say, I need help.
Yeah.
Like it's so important. So it's leaning on other people, and it is just taking care of yourself in the just you are just a complicated house plant. Like eat, sleep, drink, all those things and move your body, and then the rest of it makes it's easier to move through healing when you're taking proper care of yourself. So that was like those were really the first things that I looked towards. And then of course it's like reading books and getting other people's ideas and being inspired by other people's stories when they're teaching from their scars, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, no, and to clarify, even when you were sharing your story, you were also talking about how like I'm picking myself up. Like
Mm.
when I say don't bleed on other people, like these people who go online and they're literally crying in these videos, and like the thing is, you're going to trigger somebody else, right? You're going to make it worse for somebody else doing that. But if you do it from an empowering, maybe not a teaching standpoint, but from
Mhm.
an empowering standpoint, that's super important. I mean, for years I spoke on the stage just telling my story. There was no real lesson, right? But it
Right.
was like this is my story, and this is how I got to where I am now.
Mhm.
And now when I speak, there's a lesson. Like that's the evolution as a speaker. A lot of times when you want to be like an impact speaker versus an educational speaker, but it's just so true. And like when you talk about your journey, I also want to point out so people listening understand when you say single mom, it wasn't single mom with the kids 50% of the time. It was a single mom with the kids 100% of the time. And I can now speak 6 years later that raising kids is the hardest fucking thing you can ever do, right? It's a daily challenge. You don't know what personality the kid's going to have. You don't know any of that stuff. Now there's massive rewards, but at the
Mhm.
same time it's challenging. And I could never imagine doing it alone, right? And still being able to juggle everything that you're doing. Now, to shift a little bit, you talked about how, you got a therapist and you worked with shamans, you did all these things similar, right? I had a relationship coach and I paired that with a therapist to really figure out what's going on here.
Mhm.
And how do I get to a place where I can have a healthy relationship? Because although in the back of my head, I thought I was going to be a bachelor forever and I embraced that and I was happy in that moment once I figured out what self-love was. Um, I I wanted to do life with somebody. You know what I mean? I just didn't really know what that looked like. And my relationship coach at one point, after a lot of work on me, said, "Well, what do you want in a partner?" And I was like, "I'm not really sure." She's like, "You need to sit down and you need to make a list, and you need to make a list of these different types of things. What does she look like? What does her day to day look like? Like all these things. How does she present herself? Like what is she into? All of that stuff." And one of the things she said to me was, do you want a woman who's fully supportive of these crazy dreams you have, or do you want a woman who will go out and do her own thing and also want to achieve her crazy dreams? And I was like, well, that's a hard one because I want both. I go, and I remember the moment. I literally said to her, I go, does that even exist? Like I didn't know, right? Because it was also positioned to me as, do you want this super supportive or this super independent? And when I found you, I realized here's this woman who's insanely busy, right? Running the kids everywhere, full-time job, like an important role within the company, like doing all these things. But then you went out and you got certified in nutrition. You got certified as a yoga instructor. Now, still doing it, you got certified as a booty instructor, and all these things. Like I was like, wow, like this is what I was looking for. right? And it's possible. And I want you to speak to the single mom really quick and talk about the importance of putting yourself first, and then maybe give a tip or two about like if they feel they don't have the support, like what they can do to really kind of find it. Because I think a lot of people don't think they have it because they feel like they're super alone. And like I talk a lot about that in entrepreneurship, like early stages. But like, how can they go about finding that support so they can pursue the things they're interested in?
Yeah, it's so funny because I feel like my support was just my grit and determination a lot of the times. Um, I think that if you're passionate about what you want to do, that is going to give you the motivation to do it. I mean, my nutrition school, I was working full time. I had two very young children, like not school age yet for one of them. And I took a year-long nutrition course that was 3 to 4 hours a night every week after they were in bed. And I look back and I don't really know how I actually had the energy to do that, but I think it was just my determination and my passion about it. Like you said, I'm a lifelong student. Like I love learning. And so I think if you want to pursue your passion, you really have to love it, and that passion for it is going to push you to get the support that you need. Like for the yoga teacher training, that was 3 weekend days a month for like 9 months. Now I was interrupted by COVID, and we could talk about that later. But I had to line up babysitting. I had to prioritize, that time and say, you know what, it is okay for me to take this time away from my children because there's a lot of guilt, especially with the single mom, is taking that time for myself away from the kids and, lining up all of the childcare and being away from them for, 8, 10, 12 hours on a weekend day and being exhausted when, I get home. I think that my whole outlook has always been, and yours is too, you can't pour from an empty cup. This is why I'm the self-proclaimed queen of self-care. You have to take care of yourself first. That's the first thing I learned as a single mom, 100% when my kids were 3 and 1. They were both toddlers and very active, a lot of physical needs for them in terms of, I was still changing diapers. And, I just had to take care of myself because if I didn't, I was going to fall flat on my face, and who was going to take care of them? So self-care has always been the most important thing for me, and I think it's my biggest tip to give to anybody, but especially single moms. It's like, please don't feel guilty taking care of yourself, because if you don't, no one else is going to be able to take care of your kids.
Yeah.
Like it's just not, But I don't know, what have you learned from being uh, in this blended family of, like, how to get support? Because I know you as a stepdad, bonus dad, you are frustrated and you don't always know what to do, and you need support as well. Because as a former step parent, I understand that you're outside of the parental biological, viewpoint, but you need to understand, like, you need a break, you need support. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I say to people all the time, like being a parent's difficult for everybody, but being a step parent has a different level of difficult.
Mhm.
Um, we're well past the stage of the "you're not my dad" scenario, and we never really experienced that. But we had the Aiden moment of like, I hate Justin and all those types of things, and we can talk about why he said that. He never really hated me, etc. But you know it's different because you don't have that biological connection of like, oh, I created this thing. Therefore, the fuse is shorter, which, by the way, admittedly, my whole entire life, I've always had a short fuse. Like it's not anything new, but this is just a different layer of that. And so, what I found is when you find somebody in a similar situation to work together with them in that moment, right? Like me talking to a dad is totally different than me talking to somebody who's never been a biological father who now has stepkids and has to deal with it, right? And I have a friend in Matt now who's in a very similar situation where him and I can commiserate together. But then on the flip side to that, I have a great dad in Andre Young who has a woman in a wife that is a stepmom to his kids. And I have to go, well, what's the perspective as the parent when
Mhm.
you're seeing the step parent maybe not handling it the way that you want, right? And so these conversations that I get to have are super important. But I think the key to having this conversation is vulnerability. And a lot of times, especially as men, we're worried about being vulnerable, about sharing, like, I'm losing my shit about this, or like, I don't know how to deal with this, right? Like, we want to pretend like we have it all figured out, and that's just not the case. And so for me, and I talk about this all the time, but like, it's about the community you keep, it's about the people around you, and the willingness to have those tough conversations, but don't have them in the wrong company. And I think that's the key is like you have to find that person who's in a similar situation or
Mhm.
somebody who can emphasize,
Empathize.
empathize. This is, by the way, this is what she does for me. Somebody who empathizes with you, and not just not quite be able to put themselves in your shoes to say, okay, I understand, or I don't fully understand, but I'll give you advice anyway. And I think that's kind of how I've been able to kind of work through so many things because I'm not afraid to share my my shortcomings when it comes to certain things. But at the same time, I'll ask you this question. You talked about how I need to get married again right away and have another kid. So let's tell the audience, are we going to have another kid, babe?
No, we are not.
I wanted to leave it on a cliffhanger. We should just like make that the episode. We'll leave your answer out, because I still get asked that all the time. Are you guys
Well,
going to have another kid?
that's because you're younger than I am.
But I'm not that young. I'm 40. I don't want to start now. That means that kid's not moving out till I'm 60.
Well, I'm 45. That's definitely we have closed up shop. But, it was when I got divorced, I was just about to turn 35, so it was still kind of, in the mix. But can I actually tell you what I was going to put into my vows that you made me cut out because of time?
Yeah, hold on. I didn't make her cut it out, but we wanted to have our vows at a certain length. And she was like, I've got so much more than you. But you probably could have said it and still kept it in the same.
Yes. Yes. So on our 2-year anniversary, and I can't recall if I've told you what I was going to say.
I don't think so.
But I'm going to tell the world because I wanted to say it 2 years ago and I'm saying it now. So after the divorce and everything, and I'm not going to say it as eloquently as I wrote it. I haven't read the vows that I wrote in 2 years. So
I read mine every day, so I'm just kidding.
the weird flex. But so after the divorce and everything, and I was trying to date and everything was happening, I got this. So I don't know if everybody knows this, but I get spiritual messages all the time from my spirit guides from wherever. They're very specific in language and in intent. And I got this very strong message that there was going to be one more soul coming into our little family of 3. And the language was specific, one soul. It wasn't one man, it wasn't one child, it was just one soul. And because at the time I was insistent upon dating single dads so they understood what I was experiencing as a mom, especially as a single mom with 100% custody, I didn't understand that like there was no way there was going to be a bachelor with no kids that was going to step into this family and love us. So in my mind, I started thinking about adoption. And my kids were constantly asking me to bring a baby home. I don't know why. They were really little. They wanted a baby. And, one soul, one's coming to complete the family was constantly running through, my messages. And so I was really considering adoption for a lot of years. And I wasn't going to pull the trigger on it because I was going to wait for the kids to become older so that I could handle another younger child. But that didn't happen. And what happened was you came into this situation. We weren't supposed to have a long-term relationship, by the way. This was just supposed to be a temporary, fun little thing. And that's why we met the way
Yeah.
that we did. Because there were no expectations. There was no, I wouldn't have, asked you out if I
Yeah.
was still looking for, marriage at the time. But you came into this situation as a complete bachelor, never married, no kids, and you stepped into our family and made it complete. And that meant so much to me. And I understood so much what that message meant because if it said one man, I would have been like, no, if it obviously it wasn't one baby. But you were the one soul. And I'm so happy that we found each other the way that we did and that you stepped into this family and completed it.
Yeah,
So
I
that was
think
what I was going to say.
no, I'm glad that you said it because I wanted to shift into like the idea of like if you're out there, like I was 34, you were 30 when we started dating,
9,
38, 39.
39.
Okay. Yeah, so 39, 34 and 39. I guess we are 5 years apart.
Yes.
Um, I was fully focused on my business. Like this was early stages as a full-time entrepreneur. Like months away from my first event, like and an event takes a lot of time and energy and headspace and all those things. And you I didn't know at the time, but you were moving to Seattle in a couple months. It was actually, you told me in August I'm moving to Seattle.
Mhm.
And so we entered this with no expectations. And I think, speaking to everybody, like, to start dating without expectations, I think, is the key to opening yourself up to the idea of like, I can have a healthy relationship versus trying to form it, right? Like I think at least for me, like before I did the work, I was I like to control things. And so it was like, I don't know, I need to form this person into the person I need them to be versus like I'm just open to what happens, right? And like I didn't want to date or marry a girl with kids. Like I kind of knew, I was like, I don't think that's for me. Um I certainly wasn't looking for somebody who lived 45 minutes away. I certainly wasn't looking for somebody 5 years older than me. Like that wasn't in the car. Like that's not what I thought I was going to end up. But there was no
Mhm.
expectations. And I'll share this story on the 2 year anniversary and the 6 year anniversary of our dating. And I don't know if I shared it the last time you were on. It was so many years ago. But the first date story of like having no expectations is the perfect example of having a clean slate when you first start dating somebody. And so the story goes like this. I drove down to your hometown. We were meeting up for the first time. We had planned to meet at this bar down in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. And
Mhm.
I got there early because I'm early to everything. And they were closed for a private event. So I texted you and I was like, hey, they're closed for a private event. Like, where should we go? It was your town. I didn't know. And you're like, you were busy getting the kids ready with the babysitter. And you're like, I don't know, just pick a place anywhere on that street. It's all good. Just pick a place. I'll meet you there. I was like, great. So I look at the map. I zoom in. I'm trying to find out where to go. And I found this place. And I was like, oh, this place looks really cool. Meet me here. And you go, great. It's brand new. I want to try it out. So I go. I'm sitting at the bar waiting for you. And you text me and you go, where are you? And I go, I'm sitting at the bar. And you go, no, you're not. I'm staring at the bar. You're not sitting at the bar. And I go, no, I swear. And I took a picture of the beer list that was on the wall and I sent it to you. And you go, that's Root Down. That's on the other side of town. And my response, because I have no expectations of this going anywhere, was, well, I already ordered a beer, so just come meet me here. Right now, as the guy in a relationship, you would normally be like, okay, okay, let me settle. I'll come right back. I'll come rush down. I'll do all these things. The reality is that's not who I am. I'm a very specific person. Like
Yes.
for me, the answer is always the easiest route, meaning like the less friction possible. I already have a beer, so why don't you just come down here? It's not that far away. This makes sense. Now, if I was looking for something grand, if I was like, I need to marry this woman, who knows what I would have done. And then 6 months later, that mask would have started to wear off. And now here I am, the true self. And you're going
Mhm.
to go, well, this isn't the guy I've been dating for the last 6 months. Right. So the reality is, like, be authentically yourself from day one, even if you know, because I know that's not the right thing to do, but like, even if you know it's not the best thing to do, like, be yourself. And I think that's why we've ended up where we're at. And
Yeah.
by the way, when we talk about you going, I'm moving to Seattle, I want you to talk about like how definite this was, like all the steps you took, where you were, all the things.
So let me just tell the story. I had previously lived in Seattle for 2 years. That's actually where I got a divorce, and I had moved back to be near my family because the kids were so little. And then I went to visit my friend out there for a long weekend and began to regret my decision to leave. And so I formulated a plan to move back. So this wasn't just a random, I'm going to move to Seattle impulse moment. I was saving up money. I was working with my company to transfer myself out there. I had notified all of my friends, like everything. I notified my landlord, I will be leaving at this time. It was solid. It wasn't until about a month later that it was going to the decision of my CEO whether or not I could move. I had to write a whole justification letter of like how I'm going to work 3 hours, behind because of the time difference and all of that. But it was not just an impulse. I'm going to move to Seattle in August and see what happens. It was happening. I was looking at places. Yeah, I was going,
Yeah.
and then I wasn't.
Yeah, no. So like I mean we were dating. You got the approval from the CEO, and I remember coming down to your house like you had boxes packed up and piled up all over your house.
Yeah.
And, like it was pretty solid. And at first I was like, okay, whatever. And it's usually I think it was by like the third date I was like, oh, this is gonna be pretty tough if like she moves. But I said to
Mhm.
you, I was like, look, if you decide you're going to Seattle, like, or if you decide one day you don't want to move to Seattle, and you tell me it's because of me, like I'll break up with you.
Yes.
So at that, well, that, and I literally said it just like that. And I meant it in a sense of like, look, I'm not going to be the reason 10 years from now you regret not moving to Seattle. Like, that's
Hmm.
not on me to decide for you. Like, I probably said it much more abruptly than it seemed, but like, I'm not going to be the reason because if, 10 years into a relationship, like, oh, I hate this guy now and I never moved to Seattle because of this asshole. Like, that's a reality, right? And
Yeah.
so we had that conversation. What was it for you that made you decide like, oh no, I'm gonna stay?
Yeah, it was another one of those aha moments that we were talking about. So, as I was waiting for the CEO to approve, this took a couple of weeks. I was sitting, lying in wait for this yes or no. And the whole time I was thinking, I was starting to get anxious about it. And I was thinking, I hope he says no.
Hmm.
And then I said, wait, why do I hope he says no? Why? I've been wanting this for so long. I've been planning this. I've gone through all of these, steps to get there. Why would I want him to say no? And the truth is that I wanted something outside of me to call it off because something inside of me was saying, this is not it. And what I figured out is I sat down, as you know, I wrote a very long letter because I needed to explain to you why I was going to not move so that you wouldn't break up with me. Um, Basically, I wrote out all of the things that I was thinking, and at the end of it, it was that I was running away. Again, I'm a nomad. I've lived all over the place, and a lot of it is running away. And this was another situation where I was trying to run away from whatever was going on, and I realized that I would still be there when I got there. I would just be 3,000 miles away from my friends and family and in a beautiful place. I still love Seattle. I'd still love to, in an alternate universe, live there one day. I know not in this universe, not in this lifetime, but no, it was I thought changing my location was going to change within myself. And once I told you that, and you sent me that song, that
Mm,
Ben Platt song, Grow As We Go, that basically said, if you need to change, you can change right here by my side. And I still cry a little bit when I listen to that song.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was an interesting time because it was, and I think this is, that whole that corny saying of like if you love them let them go, and if they return they're meant for you. Like I always thought that it was pretty cheesy. I'm like, no, if you love them, work it out, right? Like I also love the saying like, look, if you're tired of me, take a nap, right? Like because we're gonna figure this out. We'll do what we have to do to make sure this works. But it was really that acceptance of that, like not trying to hold on to you, and the
Mhm.
realization that in a relationship, yes, you are a partnership, but you are also two individuals really trying to navigate life. And so, how would you allow somebody to go all like how would you allow somebody to be themselves if you don't allow them to go, okay, this is what I'm going to do, right? It's an interesting concept. I remember, I heard the lesson when I was probably 20 years old, and it didn't hit me until after I did all the work. But I had a mentor that a relationship ended, and I was trying very, very hard to get it to work again. And he goes, dude, relationships are like beach sand. I was like, what? He goes, have you ever held beach sand in your hand? I go, dude, I grew up at the beach. Of course I've held beach sand in my hand. He goes, well, what happens when you hold that beach sand like in your fist and you squeeze it? He goes, it leaks through your fingers, it falls out of your hand. But if you hold it and you cradle it, but it's free in your hand, it stays in your hand. And it was like
Mhm.
this fascinating concept that stuck in my head, but it didn't. The reality of it didn't hit me till later, right? Because you have to ultimately at the end of the day, you have to do your own work. But I didn't realize it at the time, but now as we talk about it, like I'm like, whoa, that was me going like, yo, if you love it, let it go, and if it's meant to be, it'll happen. But I also told you that if you move to Seattle, I can't talk to you anymore. I was
Yeah,
like, because I,
that was harsh. That was harsh. No, let me ask you though, once you read that letter that I wrote and realized that I was staying, what What did that feel like for you?
Um, I think it was a flood of emotions, right? Like I was ecstatic. I was happy you weren't leaving, and because I knew I loved you already, and so that was really great. It felt really good to know that like I could be a part of your life, but at the same time, it was also scary because I'm like, well, this person's everything that I've wanted. Like that means I gotta like, this might actually be serious, right? Because up until then, it wasn't. Like it
Right.
was, but it wasn't. And so like, yeah, I mean, it certainly it made a shift in me. The ultimate number one emotion was excitement and joy and all those things. But there was definitely a secondary, like, holy shit, like I guess I'm building a life with this woman that has kids, right? Like holy crap, like
Yes.
yeah, that's like a whole different world. Because I didn't just become a husband, I also became a dad. And so it's like this interesting kind of thing to navigate and go, what does that mean? Like, okay, I have to figure this shit out as we go. And but that's kind of the beauty of life, right? Like when we come across the next challenge or the next opportunity, like we have to figure out how to be the person that can step up to that role. Um, and you're somebody who does it time and time again, right? I'm sure it's very, very difficult to be my wife, and I'm sure that it's difficult to explore all these things that you want to explore with yoga and constantly leveling up and doing all those things. I just want you to know that like you have my full support always, like with anything that you want to do, with anything that you want to tackle, and and like I know that I have that with you,
Mhm.
and I think that that's key. Like I had a conversation with somebody on the podcast about how. Just recently, when I asked like, "What's your biggest moment of growth?" He said, he said marrying my wife or choosing the wife that I have, and he's like, because having your biggest supporter as your wife is the greatest thing that you can do. And he goes, I didn't realize that at the moment, right? And like you support me through all the crazy, right? Like 2022, I should have done an event but I did because of your support. You're like, babe, you want to do this, do it. And still with 2025, I was like, I think I want to do it. And you're like, you should absolutely do it. Right. And it's always that craziness of like that next challenge. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and I appreciate all your support for everything that I'm doing, especially when it comes to kids while I'm doing a yoga training, whether that's during COVID or just a couple weekends ago when I did the booty training.
Yeah. The
I
COVID one was
appreciate
crazy.
the COVID one was crazy. So I was supposed to give my practicum, which is teaching the class to pass yoga teacher training, on March 15th of 2020. And the world shut down that Friday, the 13th. So that didn't happen. And then we had to finish yoga teacher training over Zoom. And I didn't give my practicum until about, I think, like a month or so later. And during that time, I was locked up in my attic doing,
It sounds terrible. Her attic was an office. Like it was an
it was my
actual
office.
room. It sounds like you're like in like a
I
storage room.
know, locked myself in my attic. So I was up on the third floor doing yoga teacher training all day. And it was almost, I think it was like every weekend because we had to hit the 200 hours. And you were downstairs taking care of my wild children. So I appreciate you for doing that.
That was the first time I had like one-on-one time with them.
Yeah.
Like one-on-one time meaning like it wasn't me and them for an hour. It was me and them for like 10 hours. And
Yes.
I was, they were young at the time. And I always thought I was a cool uncle, but I never spent a whole day with those kids either. So I was like, what the hell do I do with these things? Like what am I going to do, right? And and the world was shut down at the same time. So it's not like I could
Right.
like take them to go jump on trampolines or to do whatever. Um but I think that was a key moment for like me being in this role because it gave
Mhm.
them the perspective of like, oh, this guy is nice and he knows what to do with us and like mom's not there doing all the stuff, right? I think that
Yeah.
it was important, but everything happens for a reason, and I think that's one of those things.
Yeah. And I think that in our relationship, early on, we had a lot of hard shoves into reality. We had COVID in August of 2020. My mom died so that we experienced losing a loved one together and like then moving in together in, oh, it was 2020 that we moved in together. Yeah. So in the first like year and a half of our relationship,
Wasn't it
it
2021 we moved in together?
no, we met in 2019. We moved in together Memorial Day weekend
Oh yeah.
of 2020 in COVID. And then my mom died. So the first year and a half into 2 years of our relationship, we had so many life experiences that happened to us. And I think it solidified our bond as a couple and as best friends. Like we already have gone through so much together that like us only being 2 years married, I'm like, I think we're good. Like we have overcome, not that we're going to talk about what takes happy marriage, but like, when you've overcome so much with somebody and they become your absolute best friend, I think that's like a great recipe for a happy life together.
Yeah, not to mention COVID hit, and I lost 75% of my income too. So like, by the way, number one reason for divorce is financial issues. And so like number two is infidelity. So like the idea of we also had the financial issues at that time too. So it was like, okay, great. Like this is what are we gonna do? And both I think both you and I, like when we go through hard shit, we kind of look at each other and go, we'll figure it out.
Mhm.
Like when I'm going through hard shit and freaking out, you look at me and go, we'll figure it out. And when you're going through hard shit, I go, yeah, we'll figure it out. Like, and
Mhm.
that's always been my mentality at the end of the day is like, you'll always figure it out. And if you're with somebody that supports that, whatever that partnership looks like, whether it's a business partnership, a spouse, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, like if you have that ultimate person that can go, we'll figure it out because it's not a one person show. It's not like, hey, you're doing your thing and I'm doing my thing and we'll figure those things out separately and then we'll have dinner together every night. Like that's not how that works. And I think that's key. But I want to ask you a question that I ask not everybody, but a lot of people on this show. It's not the two-part one; it's the other one. Look, you've now, I mean, at this point, over the last couple of years, you've created a lot of content that's on the internet. You've been on a lot of podcasts. You're writing a book. You're doing all these things. But I want you to fast forward, and you're now at the end of your life. Um, and obviously you're surrounded by your loved ones, but the unfortunate thing is all your content, everything you've ever created, everything you've ever talked about on Instagram with your crystal healings and your meditations and your eat right and do all that stuff, all that shit went out the door. No longer exists. And you can only be remembered for one sentence. What would you want that sentence to be?
I didn't prepare for this one. Um,
That sounds like you don't listen to my podcast. What?
I do. I listened to it. I just didn't prepare for this. I would just want me to be remembered as somebody who, like, she just loved so deeply the people in her circle, and she wanted so much to lift them up in life.
I love it. And it's true. Like that's who you are at the core. And like I see how much you care for others. I think that it's such a beautiful thing. Because unfortunately a lot of people aren't that way, right? Like a lot of people are like, well, what am I gonna get out of this? How am I gonna win? And you don't think that way. I think it's beautiful. But I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how can people find you online? How can they get more of your goodness?
I'm mostly on Instagram. It's my handle is Lauren E. Schenck, so don't forget the E in there. I'm also on Facebook, Lauren Schenck dash holistic wellness coach, I believe it is. LaurenSchenck.com. But yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's where I am. I'm not promoting anything right now. I'm just living. So I'm not selling anything. I'm just living and sharing goodness as much as possible. So yeah, just hit me up on Instagram.
Yeah, the E is important because as we
Yeah.
discussed, if this marriage ever ended, it's going back to the E and staying there. So the it's the E is important. By the way, that's her maiden name's Ebert. And so the E stands for that. So her middle name is not you guys get it.
Yeah, I
Uh,
legally changed my main name to my middle name the first time I got married, so I just kept it there.
Love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, which is in
Yes.
your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth? But since you've been on before, we're talking the last, I think it's been 3 years since you've been on, something like that. We weren't married. So it's at least 3 to 4 years. So since we
Mhm.
last spoke, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh, you tripped me up there. I think my biggest moment of growth. See, I have to go back to like before. I'm gonna cheat a little bit and go further back than 3, 4 years. My biggest moment of growth was really when my mom died in recent times. And it's because I changed so many things because that moment changed everything for me. It changed my family dynamic. It changed the way I was looking at life. Um, I ended up grieving my dad's loss at the same time as my mom's loss because I didn't deal with it back then because I was in a toxic marriage and I didn't have time to grieve my dad. So, as you saw, I grieved both my parents at the same time when my mom died. And that was a massive amount of healing work that I went through. I set more boundaries. I changed relationships. I let go of long-term friendships. I literally reshifted everything in my life because her loss was, she had a tendency for narcissistic abuse. And so her loss freed me from those expectations that I had held up with her, from her for so long. And I was able to finally breathe and say, okay, I'm just living solely for me and not trying to make anybody else, happy or calm in that way. And so it just, that was a huge moment of growth for me to say, okay, now it's my time and this is my life, and these are the people in it, and these are the people not, and these are the things I want to focus on, and these are the things I'm no longer tolerating.
Mm, I love it. Babe, I love you.
I love
Happy
you.
anniversary.
Happy anniversary. You want
And
to go out and celebrate?
well, we just celebrate. Well, as of the release of this, we just celebrated, but we'll go out tonight too and we'll celebrate.
Okay.
Love
Can't
you.
wait. Love you.